In today's video, we're breaking down Devin Neal of Kansas. What are his strengths and weaknesses? How do we think he's best deployed at the NFL level? Where do we think he goes in the NFL draft? And finally, what do we think we get out of him in fantasy? Watch to the end of this video and you'll have a good idea. Taking a look at his height and weight, per PFF, he's 5'11", 215 pounds. I don't have any reason as to doubt this, but I will say, despite having what projects to be a 30.0 BMI, he doesn't have some of the power that you might expect out of a running back with his BMI and general frame. In terms of his age, he's 21 years and 5 months old right now, and so you might think that he's a relatively young prospect, and that's true, but he's actually a senior, so he's not going to be an early declare. Like I've said in previous videos, we don't really care quite as much with running backs. It's not as much of a predictor of success at the NFL level, but obviously we prefer our guys to be young. Nonetheless, he will be 22 at a point during the NFL season. In terms of his production profile, it is really impressive, honestly. As a true freshman, he had 159 attempts for 705 on the ground, only 4.4 yards per carry, but 8 touchdowns and no fumbles. Then through the air on 10 targets, he had 7 receptions, 57 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. But take a look at the jump he made in his sophomore season. And so he went from 159 to 179 attempts, 705 to 1,093 rushing yards. More importantly, 4.4 yards per attempt up to 6.1. And so with more volume, increased efficiency. We love to see that. Then in terms of his touchdown scoring, he went from 8 to 9, but he did have 2 collegiate fumbles during that season, a career high, but fumbles, as you can see, really aren't a big issue with him. But also take a look at the passing game production. He went from 10 targets to 29, 7 receptions up to 21, 57 receiving yards up to 183, and matched his previous season with another receiving touchdown. But then we saw another jump as a true junior. And so he went from 179 attempts up to 203, 1,093 rushing yards up to 1,280, 6.1 yards per attempt up to 6.3, so even more efficient with more volume. We like to see that twice in a row. And then he took a massive jump in terms of touchdown production. And so he went from 9 up to 16 and decreased his fumbles from 2 to 1 in this junior season, while also seeing increased involvement in the passing game even from his sophomore to junior season. And so he had 31 targets, 25 receptions, 217 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. And then as a true senior, he had 218 attempts, 1,262 rushing yards. His yards per attempt did dip from 6.3 down to 5.8, but that's still a decent number. And then he matched his previous season with 16 rushing touchdowns again, and 1 fumble this season. Then on 31 targets, he had 26 receptions, 266 receiving yards, which was a career high, and another receiving touchdown. And so what we can definitely say is he made multiple leaps consistently, and at least through 3 seasons, saw his career yards per attempt rise with more volume. And so we love seeing that. And also, he's a decent receiver in the passing game, but more importantly, he really doesn't fumble very often. Looking at some advanced stats, among draft-eligible FBS running backs with 100-plus rushing attempts, that's a sample size of 76 here, Neal received 218 rush attempts. His yards per attempt of 5.8 was 16th in the sample size, so that's pretty good. His yak per attempt of 3.73 is 19th, that's pretty good as well. His breakaway run percentage of 37.1 was tied for 36th. Still decent, but not among the leaders. But look at his PFF rushing grade. His 90.5 score is 8th. And I don't just blindly follow what PFF says in terms of how they grade prospects, but I definitely believe this grade, and that is definitely reflective of how talented of a runner he is. When you see some of my grades later and I explain some of them, you will definitely understand the talent he possesses in terms of a runner of the football. Looking at his PFF receiving grade, his 65.9 was tied for 23rd. He isn't a particularly special receiving back, but he can get it done. In terms of his yards per out run, his 1.31 were tied for 12th in the sample size, so that's very efficient. His elusiveness rating of 84.2 was 29th in the sample size. His missed tackles forced of 46 were tied for 21st, and that's 0.21 per attempt. He had 105.2 rushing yards per game on 18.2 attempts per game, 16.9 receiving yards per game on 2.2 receptions per game, and a total of 17 touchdowns this season. As far as his grading, remember that he's give or take 5'11", 215 pounds, which would be a 30.0 BMI, which is requisite size for bell cow usage at the NFL level. He's a senior out of Kansas. My valuation, I think he's worthy of a 3rd round pick. My comparison, I think he's a Le'Veon Bell type of runner. And so he displays extreme patience, very good burst through the hole, He uses his speed and acceleration deceptively to achieve good angles for him, manipulatively get around linebackers and safeties. And then he has a special ability once he gets to the second level to just bend and change directions instantly. It is quite impressive. And when you just watch the film on him, even just watch some highlights, you will see Le'Veon Bell in action. As far as my grade, I gave him a 73 out of 100, which is a good running back prospect. In terms of his contact balance, I gave him a 3 out of 5. I think it's good. He's not going to be breaking multiple tackles, I don't think. I think he's more so an intelligent runner than he is a per se powerful runner. And I think his brain is going to really help him out more so than his body per se. And I think that blends into his physicality, which I think is just average. Despite having, a projected 30.0 BMI, he really just isn't the most physical back. It doesn't really work. But he's intelligent and he understands that it doesn't work. So he doesn't try to waste his time with things that aren't going to work. He knows what he can and can't do, and he maximizes yardage consistently. Then you get to his vision. He has incredible vision. He almost never misses cutback lanes. He generally picks the best hole every single time. It really is incredible. It is the best vision I think that I have seen in 2 years of grading running back prospects. It's almost flawless, honestly. His ball security, a 4.5 out of 5. He's only had 4 collegiate fumbles on over 700 rush attempts, which is really, really good. There have been a couple backs that haven't had any, and so he doesn't quite get a 5, but it is still very good, and ball security is not going to be any issue for him at the NFL level. Then you have your run IQ. He manipulates the linebackers by being very patient, setting up his blocks, picks the right hole every time, and almost never misses cutback lanes, and then bends around once he gets to the second level to maximize yardage. It is so impressive. Just watch him. He is Le'Veon Bell on the ground. Then you get to his speed. He doesn't really have that extra gear in terms of the long speed to house some of these 70 to 80 yard touchdowns, but it's not terrible, and he is going to get chunk gains consistently. And part of the reason why is because his run IQ and his vision is so good, but you combine that with his incredible acceleration, which is just about elite. It is in the general elite range, in my opinion. I have seen better, but it is really, really good. And when you combine that with his patience and his vision and run IQ, it's absolutely lethal. And so as far as his deceleration goes, I gave him a 3 out of 5. When he isn't running near his full speed, it is quite good. He can slow down relatively well, especially for somebody with a decent frame. But once he gets going more so towards his maximum speed, he really does lose some of his deceleration, and it takes him a little bit longer. And so I've definitely seen better, but most of the running backs that I've seen better from are smaller backs, so it does make sense with his frame. In terms of his agility, I think it's pretty good, a little bit above average. He has a decent jump cut. He can make people miss, but he more so runs with intelligence than overt athleticism per se. And then as far as his change of direction, it's incredible. And so once he picks the hole and picks the correct hole, because he does just about every time, once he gets to the linebackers, he just instantly changes one direction or another. It's really good. I have seen better, but it is still going to work at the NFL level. It's impressive. Then you get to his catching. I gave him a 3.5 out of 5. And so he has 5 drops on 101 career targets, which is decent. His hands look good on film, but he's not a special receiver in terms of having soft hands. You probably aren't going to see him, one hand anything, in my opinion. But in terms of his route running, it's also fine. He's really good in the screen game and the dump off game, in the flats. I don't think you're really going to be seeing him lined up out wider in the slot very often and running complex wide receiver type routes, but he can definitely get it done for you in the receiving game. And after the catch, he's pretty good. He, once again, uses his acceleration speed deceptively to maximize yardage. He's decent with his blockers as well. And so I do think that he is going to be able to be utilized in the passing game. But I think that one thing is going to be an issue for him, his pass protection. Despite being 5'11", give or take 215 pounds, with a relatively good BMI of 30, and being willing in pass protection, I think he kind of lacks some of the functional play strength to be very good in pass pro. And so I do think that's going to be a limitation for him at the NFL level. And if he doesn't improve, I'm not sure that he is going to be a 3-down back. But as far as the receiving goes, it's not really an issue. So I think it'll be a little bit situational as to who he has on the team next to him and whether or not the team thinks that he can be the 3-down back. Then we get to the dog factor. I gave him a 3.5 out of 5. He just isn't the most physical guy. His contact balance isn't tremendous. And so that kind of plays into this dog factor. Now, in terms of intelligence, maximizing yardage, picking the correct hole just about every time, finding cutback lanes, it's great. He's going to be a fantastic scheme fit in zone schemes, but it's just not quite there like it is with some of these other running backs. Then we have our analytics, a 4 out of 5. He's had 3 straight 1,000-yard plus rushing seasons. He's also had 2 seasons in a row with 16 rushing touchdowns, and he's had over 200 receiving yards in each of the past 2 seasons. But once again, he doesn't really have one of those crazy Heisman level seasons. And so I think his analytics are quite good and even great, but they're not quite there with the Ashton Genty types. Then you have your projected draft capital. Per NFL Draft Buzz, he's going to be a 3rd-round pick. I think that's pretty fair, a good valuation. And if he does go in the 3rd round, it'll be really important where he goes as to the running backs in front of him in terms of if they have a potential high team investment, because if they don't, I think he could quickly assert himself in most backfields. And then his creativity, it's a 5 out of 5. I don't know. He is Le'Veon Bell. He's the most patient back I've scouted in 2 years. His vision is incredible. The way he finds cutback lanes, his change of direction to just instantly go left or right, it's incredible. And so as far as creativity, it's a max 5 out of 5, and it is probably the best that I've seen in 2 seasons. Then we have the potential worries and limitations. He doesn't really possess the long speed to house those 70 to 80-yard rushing touchdowns. And so it's just going to limit his upside, to be honest with you, but he's going to get chunk gains pretty consistently. Then he might once again not also be a 3-down back due to issues in pass protection. I don't really know how much he's going to be able to improve his functional play strength, rather. But as far as willingness, there's no issue there. And as far as a route runner, he's decent in the screen game, the flat game. You're just not going to see him run these complex wide receiver type routes. And so, as I previously mentioned, I think he's going to be selected in the 3rd round. And so I wanted to take a look at 3rd round running back hit rates from 2020 through 2024. And so in 2020, we had Antonio Gibson, Keyshawn Vaughn, Zach Moss, and Darrington Evans. In 5 NFL seasons, Antonio Gibson's been an RB1 once, an RB2 once. And so that's a 20% RB1 and a 20% RB2 hit rate. We would definitely like that if Devin Neal gave us this kind of production. He's definitely trailed off a little bit, but it's important to remember that he was a converted receiver. So he definitely hadn't been playing the position very long, which makes his immediate production pretty impressive, honestly. Then we look at Keyshawn Vaughn. In 5 seasons, he was selected 76th overall, by the way. No RB1 seasons, no RB2 seasons, a 0% hit rate across the board, an absolute bust. Zach Moss picked 86th overall. In 5 seasons, he's not been an RB1 nor an RB2, and so that's a 0% hit rate across the board. He's definitely had some spurts of production, but hasn't really put together an entire season. And then we have Darrington Evans picked 93rd overall. In 5 NFL seasons, he hasn't had an RB1 nor an RB2 season, and so that's a 0% hit rate across the board, and he's definitely a bust in terms of fantasy production. In 2021, we had Trey Sermon picked 88th overall. In 4 seasons, he's neither been an RB1 nor an RB2. Absolutely a bust. You would be pretty upset if you ended up wasting a pick. And he was actually going in the 1st round of some drafts. And so that was a big bust of a pick for some people. Then we take a look at 2022. We had Rachaad White, Tyrion Davis-Price, and B-Rob. And so Rachaad White was picked 91st overall. In 3 seasons, he's been an RB1 once and an RB2 once. And so that's a 33% RB1 and RB2 hit rate. We'd be stoked if he gave us this kind of production. Tyrion Davis-Price in 3 seasons after being picked 93rd overall hasn't been anything for us, a 0% hit rate across the board. And Brian Robinson picked 98th overall in 3 seasons. He hasn't been an RB1 yet, but he's been an RB2, so that's a 33% RB2 hit rate and a 0% RB1 hit rate. He's been decent for us when he's been given the volume. You might not be ecstatic, but you definitely take that over some of these other guys in terms of if he gave us this type of production. Then in 2023, we have Kendre Miller, Tyjae Spears, Devon Achane, and Tank Bigsby. And so Kendre Miller in 2 seasons after being picked 71st overall hasn't been an RB1 nor an RB2. He's been stuck behind Kamara, so not exactly fair to him, but he's been injured quite often, so he's definitely been a bust. Tyjae Spears picked 81st overall in 2 seasons, has neither been an RB1 nor an RB2. 0% hit rate across the board. He's been stuck behind Tony Pollard as of late. He has spurts of fantasy production, and in the fantasy playoffs this past season, he was quite good for us. Maybe he turns it around, but overall, not the best pick for fantasy purposes. Devon Achane picked 84th overall in 2 seasons, has been an RB1 and an RB2, and so that's a 50% hit rate across the board. He's been phenomenal. You would be stoked if he gave us this kind of production. Then we have Tank Bigsby, picked 88th overall. In 2 seasons, he's neither been an RB1 nor an RB2. He's been stuck behind ETN. He gave us a couple decent games this year when he was actually allowed to be given volume. Unfortunately, he's still stuck behind ETN, at least right now. So definitely a bust for the most part, but it's not per se his fault exactly. And then in 2024, we had Trey Benson, Blake Corum, and Marshawn Lloyd. And so Benson, picked 66th overall, was not an RB1 nor an RB2 this past season. He was drafted behind James Conner, so not really his fault. When he was given volume, he looked quite good. And so if Conner was to go down with injury, he'd, I think, be pretty good, but a bust of a pick if you picked him, in the early second potentially, so far at least. Then we have Blake Corum, picked 83rd overall. In 1 season, he's neither been an RB1 nor an RB2. Just like with Benson, stuck behind a good running back in Kyron Williams. He broke his arm in the final week of this past season. I think he'll be back in plenty of time, though. Once again, not really fair. He wasn't given the requisite volume to be able to do anything, but he did look pretty good when he was given a little bit of volume. And then we have Marshawn Lloyd, picked 88th overall. In 1 season, he's neither been an RB1 nor an RB2, 0% hit rate across the board. He was dealing with multiple injuries and was on IR for a good majority of the season. But once again, just like with these other guys, he's behind a talented back in Josh Jacobs, and so it really wasn't fair to him. He didn't have a chance, but that combined with injury did make him a bust of a pick. And so overall, it gets a little bit sketchy. I mean, you have your Antonio Gibsons, your Rashad Whites, your Devon Achans, but then you have your Keyshawn Vaughns, your Trey Sermons. And so this is very risky territory. And so where does Devin Neal rank among his contemporaries in the 25 class, at least the prospects in which I've created videos for, as well as the 24 class stacked on top of each other? Well, once again, I think that he's a good running back prospect. And so you have your great prospects, at least according to the grading scale in which I use. And so you have Genty, Henderson, James, and Hampton in the great tier, but he's in good company. Judkins and Johnson in this class are a little bit ahead of him, and I would definitely prefer both of them. But Devin Neal's in decent company with Trey Benson, who is talented, just wasn't given the volume necessary behind Conner. Tootin, who I think is an explosive back. Jonathan Brooks, who it's unfortunate that his career has kind of been derailed by multiple ACL tears, but I think that he was a fundamentally sound and talented running back, just not the best athlete per se. And then you have Jalen Wright, who is an explosive back, but stuck behind Devon Achane and was behind Mostert as well. And so I think that there's definitely a chance that he ends up being a decent back. If he gets 3rd round draft capital, it is a little bit sketchy because we don't really know. It'll be interesting to see if he goes to a team with an established running back, at least with more significant team investment ahead of him. But if not, I think he could easily take over a backfield. He is an impressive runner. His vision, his change of direction, his burst is impressive. And remember that he's give or take 5'11", 215 pounds, which if true would be a 30.0 BMI, which is requisite size to be a bell cow back. But once again, he's not per se the best in pass protection and isn't a dynamic receiver per se, but he's pretty good. But once again, as a runner, he is incredibly impressive. Once again, he reminds me of Le'Veon Bell as a runner, at least. He has ridiculous patience, incredible burst through the hole. He has this change of direction after he gets to the linebackers to manipulatively uses his speed and acceleration to maximize angles and maximize yardage. It's really incredible. If you watch any tape of him, I don't know how you couldn't be impressed, honestly. And once again, I think that he's a 73 out of 100 in terms of how he scores, which is a good running back prospect. And I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Major Jack, and Infamy MTG. If you would like to become a member, I'm going to leave a link in the comment section. As far as what you'll gain, you'll get access to a private Discord server. I'm going to have a real life and fantasy football chat where we talk about real life NFL news. Any questions you might have will be answered in the real life NFL chat. And as far as the fantasy football chat, we'll talk about what's happening in the fantasy world. I'll give you team reviews, give you optimal roster construction based on your specific league settings, trades you can make to strengthen your roster. buying and selling points, specifically price points for various players based on your positions of need. I'll give you a special shout out, obviously, on all of these videos. You'll get early access to videos. You'll be part of private live streams that are not available to regular YouTube members. And you will also have the ability to suggest videos specifically for you on Patreon. I've already made one on Isaac Rendo as per request by one of my Patreon members. And so once again, if you would like to join, the link is going to be in the comment section. Thanks.